Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to have you with us. My name is Martin Tiderström. I'm Director of Business Development at ADGM, and I'm very pleased to welcome you all to this ADGM webcast series. Thank you all for participating. We're off to a good start. We have done a few of these last week. The first one had an audience of 2,500 people, the second one close to 4,000, with plenty of activity on social media and good interaction. We like that, and wherever you follow this, please leave comments or post questions. Our team is monitoring all channels and forwarding your questions to us, and we'll try to address everything we can, either during the discussion or, if there is too much, by answering your comments afterwards online. We hope you'll help make this a really interesting discussion. We are in unprecedented times, and before we get to business, I want to emphasize that ADGM and our community recognize those of you who are impacted by the virus. Those of you who are not able to see your loved ones, especially in this holy month of Ramadan, and those who worry about the future. We know that many do. We also know that many businesses across industries and sectors face challenges. Many struggle in the here and now, overcoming direct challenges from the mobility restrictions, supply issues, changing demand, sustaining the revenue, selling, delivering, getting paid, and controlling costs. And we know that there are increasing difficulties in managing relations, also with the closest partners, customers, suppliers, creditors, and with staff. Over the coming weeks and months, we have a good number of webcasts to help address these type of questions from great organizations in the UAE and beyond. We also know that businesses struggle on the longer term in making the right choices for the future. And although no one knows how long this pandemic will last, its full economic implications, or how the world will look after recovery, most of the executives we speak to believe that business in their industries will be different, and they will need to think differently on challenges and on opportunities. This longer perspective, that's our focus here today. What's going on in the world? What awaits our region and our industries? How can we think about it, and what can we do about it? Here to help, and it's great to have you with us, are three experts, broadly experienced from global strategy consulting firm Roland Berger: Bhavin Shah, Feroz Senwala, and Dr. Markus Stritzel. We are very pleased to have you here. Gentlemen, to all three of you, welcome. Bhavin, please.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you, Martin. And firstly and the foremost, thank you so much to ADGM for setting up such a beautiful platform. And I think it's important. I genuinely believe, and it's a philosophy of our firm as well, that, in such unprecedented times when no one knows what needs to be done, the only way to find any solution is to work collectively and collaboratively. And ADGM is creating a very good platform to share these ideas and knowledge, and that's extremely helpful. And I believe jointly we all will be able to find solutions to particular event at this point in time, I would call it, which none of us have an experience of. In terms of COVID-19 and what it has brought to us, I think COVID is two parts. COVID is a part of health crisis that we have today, which is more related to what's happening to the people, what's happening to old people, what's happening to young people, and the death rate around it. COVID is also associated with the immediate health management system crisis. And I personally believe this is more of a health management system crisis. We don't have health management system strong enough to be able to afford having multiple number of people falling sick at the same time. And now what it is leading to is essentially the long-term economic impact from COVID, what we call it COVID-triggered potential recession. Right. So from a global perspective, this is where we are seeing. But when we come to the region, we have an add-on. We don't just have a COVID-triggered crisis at our hand to manage in short term and long term. We also have another big angle, which is around the oil prices. The low oil prices that we see today in the economy is definitely hurting, and it has a direct impact on liquidities of our entire financial system and hence the wider economy. If you look at financial services in then particular and look at into the banks, look at into other financial institutions like asset management, insurance, each one of them is also getting impacted through COVID-19. And it's primarily around, we see it this way, that in 2008 when the crisis happened, everyone said the reason the crisis happened was because of banks. This time it's different. Crisis is not because of banks. If anything, banks are the emergency aid or the only aid available as a mechanism to the government to distribute any form of benefit to the economy and revive it. And banks have their own set of problems, right? Banks have their own set of problems. They can already see the rise in NPAs. If you see locally, the number of check bounce cases have really grown a lot in last 8 weeks. Consumer behavior is changing. People are going to demand more contactless and hence rise of digital as well. And last but not the least, banks also have a lot of interbank exposure, and those exposures will also come to light. And of course, within the country ourselves, we have a huge real estate industry, and that is also something which is having a huge exposure on the bank side as well. I mean, with that background, what I would say is, where it is heading, it is time for banks, financial institutions, and all the companies to watch out the future prudently and work towards it. There's a lot needs to be done, and as we go through rest of the discussion, we'll talk about it. But there is genuinely a need to not take this event lightly. There's a huge wave of tide likely to hit the financial sector in next 4 to 6 months. We are just seeing the tip of the iceberg and the early indication today. The good thing is we have 4 to 6 months to prepare for such tide, and I hope banks and institutions would prepare themselves strongly for it. At the end, they should be able to turn around the corner very smoothly. With that, I'll hand it over to my fellow partner, Firoz.
Thank you very much, Bhavin. That was great, and thank you, ADGM, for giving us this platform. My view is very similar to Bhavin's, but I'll add a bit more color from my perspective. I've been here 12 years, and in these 12 years, been through a couple of crises where, we had interesting resets in economy. This one's slightly different in the sense that if you look at this particular pandemic, there has been no destruction in terms of any infrastructural destructions. It's not an earthquake or a volcano or anything like that. This is basically a health issue. We are fundamentally the same people. We are fundamentally all working towards a goal of trying to get to the other side of this crisis, and we will. Human ingenuity and our entrepreneurial spirit will take us to the other side. The question is, what's the distance, how long it is, how do we survive that distance, and how do we come out on the other side? And I see glimmers of hope in that, in the sense that we are speeding up development of vaccines and therapeutics to be able to get to market very quickly. We're also making sure that fundamentally our infrastructure remains constant, and the services that are overlaid on that infrastructure are repurposed or relooked at in a slightly different manner. And we'll cover that in a great bit of detail. Think about it, this region. This region depends on transportation, logistics, tourism, and also the airline industry, which brings in lots and lots of people through our regional economy, who then come into the city-state, purchase, and then leave. A lot of that has seen a huge amount of value destruction. Airlines are down 80 to 90%. Retail is down 70%. Malls were closed. Education has now gone online. People are not commuting to work, and hence very limited amount of traffic on the streets. That has created a trickle-down effect. And as Bhavin said, all these things have to be dealt with from the perspective of managing the immediate liquidity issues that are being faced by people, which is how do people pay their rents for shops? How do the retail environment survive? How do SMEs manage through this crisis? All of that is happening right now. But eventually, the lenders who have now shored up this will get affected in the form of NPLs and others. So the banking system will probably come along further down the line. So the question is, how do the governments address this now? What is the nature of the stimulus package going to look like, if there is one? How would we make sure that the moral hazard question is being answered properly, so that we don't end up in a situation where, given that we are largely an expat-driven economy, where people take the money and the stimulus and then leave? How do we deal with repatriation and people leaving, given that the economy is built with a different construct? So all these questions are emerging. So as time goes on and we debate things, I'll try and cover some of these things from a technology-driven perspective. I came to the region as the head of Intel Capital, investing in startups and technologies, and things have happened, or things have matured quite a bit in the last 12 years. So as we move forward and new forms of businesses are arising, the question is there a way technology plays a part in getting us out of this this particular event into a better tomorrow? And what would that better tomorrow look like? Is it going to be fundamentally different? It'll be fundamentally repurposed, or are we going to revert back to our same old nature of who we are as human beings, who like to communicate with each other, socialize with each other, touch each other? All of those things will come about in terms of how technology will try to evolve and help you fit into the new reality. So as we go on, we'll cover that in a little bit more detail. And then in the Q&A, I'll share with you some specific examples of how each of these segments are addressing this from a technology point of view. So thank you very much for your time, and over to Marcus.
Yes, hello everybody. My name is Markus Spritzel, and warm welcome from Europe. Thanks for giving the opportunity to have this platform and discuss these interesting topics. I mean, I think we all are hit by this virus in different forms. There are several industries which are still okay in the way they work. For example, chemicals and also pharmaceuticals. So there are some, I would say, some interesting lights, and the question is, what will happen to the other industries that we see? And Feroz mentioned some of them, which are very important, especially for your region. For us here in Europe, of course, we also see the development in the automotive sector. What will happen to that? And we have currently discussions what will follow after they have shut down their productions. I think this crisis is in that way brutal, because it's showing all the, I would say, things that haven't been attacked before the crisis are now coming up and bring into a light where we see, okay, there has to be something to do and we have to deal with that. And I think this is very, very interesting, but of course it's also a challenge. And the challenge is that nobody knows exactly what the future will look like after this, let's say, after this lockdown that we had also here in Europe. Currently, we see a bit of light at the tunnel. We see some good developments also from our company, especially in Asia. But of course, we are not sure what the future will bring. Today, and what I would like to discuss is, on the one hand side, what is the impact on the other industry, and then also question what does that mean for financial services institutions. What we've seen here in Europe is that the financial services institutions are getting a very important pillar in overcoming this crisis, in the way that they have to bring the money to private clients, but also to companies, and that is the money from the government, and the question is how to deal with that. We have a lot of demand on development loans and things like that here in Europe. Question is how to deal with that. Second question is how to make sure that the people who get the money are stable also after this COVID crisis. And the third question, and this is what Ferris also mentioned, is the question: what does that mean for banks on their side, in their balance sheets, what does it mean for NPL management and things like that. So I think in these very uncertain times, it's not so easy to give an answer. But I think the most important thing is that we bring the things to the table, discuss them, and discuss them with different views and also from different perspectives, and then maybe come to a conclusion which we might have to adapt when we see other developments. So thanks a lot for being here, for giving this opportunity. I would like to ask the audience to give us questions and to discuss, and I'm looking forward to that. Thanks a lot.
Thank you again, gentlemen. Very interesting observations, and I think we've set a very broad, interesting, and good grounds for hopefully good discussion and many questions. If I can start and follow up on something you touched upon here, Bhavin, I think obviously at the bottom of the current situation is the virus, and the virus is something that affects us as individuals. That in turn then has knock-on effects on industries, on companies, on the economy. If we look at the individual sides on us as consumers, what changes can we see around the world now that you think are a reality for companies to take into account, those that are more likely to stay? Bhavin, did you hear me?
Martin, I missed your question, sorry.
Oh, okay, yes. It would be interesting to hear a little bit from your perspective about the changing consumer patterns we see as a result of the pandemic and the other changes it brings to us.
Sure. I think there are a few things to note, and I'm giving you answer more specifically. There are two sides, right? One is the human behavioral change. Now, would we feel comfortable shaking hands? Would we feel comfortable going to big gatherings for a short time, long time? For how long we always will remember the times of COVID and what happened to us, and we always be cautious, right? So if I'm going to go in a London tube, or I'm going to go to any public place, or even a big event in Do Arena, then am I going to be cautious if the person next to me starts coughing? So that's the first human side, right? But from a pure financial services perspective, when you look at a retail client, a crisis like this is going to create certain behavioral change. So one behavioral change for sure is going to be all people in the retail market will now probably think cash is king, and saving cash in bank account is important, even before you make your long-term commitment, right? So for a short term, we are going to see that people will start accumulating cash vis-a-vis trying to spend money on credit card. That behavioral change is definitely going to be there. The other behavioral change is going to be, it's like decision. Should I buy a new car, or am I fine dragging my car for another 1 year? Should I buy a brand new TV just because it's in the market, or should I wait for some more time? So that is going to impact consumer finance business a lot. It's also going to impact mortgage business, because any long-term commitment decisions people are now going to rethink. Especially the expat population who were considering that this seems to be a good market to become owner than being renter, they will now reassess it, considering whether they have a future here, short-term, long-term, what crisis they are going to be. And then adding fuel to this entire fire for banks is the whole changing pattern where people will demand more and more contactless, I would say contactless products and contactless experiences, which obviously brings in regulatory challenge. Can you do KYC completely contactless? Do I need to sign a form? And if I'm signing a form, I use my pen, his pen. So there are a lot of these kind of changes that we will now see coming, and which is something that banks will have to prepare to work towards.
Mm-hmm. Interesting, thank you. Feroz, you mentioned technology and how technology can help some of the challenges we see now and others that are becoming. Do you want to give us some more examples of that?
Yeah, so let me kind of go sector by sector to share with you what we are doing immediately, because I mean, obviously we have to deal with the crisis the way it is. Um, Most cities and states have gone through some sort of a lockdown, and within that lockdown, and as now economies are opening up, people are thinking, well, how do we manage to make sure that this virus doesn't flare up? So in the retail area, what I'm seeing is that there's a lot of malls that have opened up are now at a reduced capacity, and they are measuring those through traffic management software. They are doing social separation through software, but because of cameras and monitoring. They are looking at geospatial data through your mobile phone, density measurement. In some cases, robotics are being used for delivery, pickup. So this kind of stuff has now happened, and predominantly, as Bhavin said, it's to create a new norm of a contactless society, if we can have one, right? And especially in areas of high density, you want to create as little contact as possible, at least in the near term. I'll give you another example. In hospitality, people are discussing how wellness and hygiene certifications can happen so that people, when they come in, are quote unquote guaranteed a tech-based solution that disinfects the room through UV rays or any kind of tech-based product. And again, they also talk about creating this geofencing, where everyone who's tested and is negative would be brought in, and you could then be free to move around everywhere because you're geofenced around a lot of people who are not infected, and you can be as normal. People are talking about connected systems of gyms. So now you don't have to go to a gym downstairs in a hotel. They're going to drop a Peloton to your room, and you log on, and you'll be racing with your friend in Barcelona. Hydro wave, where you can be rowing on the River Thames while you're in your room, playing 2-day golf. Right? How does 2-day golf work? Well, 2-day golf works as follows. Martin, you go play golf today, and you record it, and then I play golf the next day. It's recorded, and then you and I have a debate on who did well. Right? That's called the 2-day golf, right? So people are coming up with these kind of creative methodologies to be able to take us into a new norm. Now, let's step back a little bit. Is this real humanity? And the answer is really not. So the panacea to this is that everybody is waiting for the fact that eventually, when the virus is contained through a vaccine, fundamentally, maybe work may change. People may not feel like going to work as much, but interactions will never change. We're human after all. We still like to meet each other. We still like to have a beer with each other, shake hands with each other, whatever you do, right? So the reality of that culture will not change. So the short-term element, Martin, is that technology will help guide you to a zone which gets you to the other side of the wall. But ultimately, once things settle down, a few things will stick, but a lot of things will fall, right?
Correct.
And that's how I look at it as we move forward. And as we move on and questions come in, we'll talk a little bit about the repercussions of this. And an example somebody asked was real estate. What's happening to real estate in the region? Right? And again, it all depends on space and distance. If the distance is short, I think people will revert back to their own view. I think this is a fabulous place to live in, Dubai and Abu Dhabi and UAE in general. And if we can make a living out here, we will. So from that perspective, I'm less pessimistic, let's say. I will become very pessimistic if 18 months go by and there's no vaccine. Then things change quite a bit. But at this stage, I think we're still in the early stage. We're the infants in this space.
Thank you. And Dr. Marcus, I want to pick up on something Feroz said, talking about returning to the same old tomorrow. Now, I assume that some industries will, after this is over, go back to the same old tomorrows. Others are up for a bumpy ride and a bigger change. You see the world from Germany, not from here. How do you see this playing out across industries?
Yeah, I think as stated, there are some industries that are not really affected by this crisis, as I said, like pharma and things like that. There are of course some winners in this game. For example, Amazon and these players, home delivery players. We had another one, pharmaceutical companies who are sending online stuff and things like that. So there are some, I would say, winners in these times. But on the other side, I think especially the very traditional industries like auto, like tourism, that some said or not. So I think these are very affected by this crisis. Also on the industrial products and services. And the question, of course, will be how long will that take? And I mean, we have seen here in Europe some governmental programs to really to pump some money into the market, that the demand will not slow down anymore. And of course, to give also a sign that the people are not alone, that the government wants to help and things like that. I think that was very important, especially in April when these programs were set up in a very fast and efficient way. On the other side, I mean, that's also for clear. We cannot afford to do that 3 or 4 times. I mean, at the end, we also have only some money. So the question is, in which topic do you put this money? And I think this is currently especially under discussion. I mean, you mentioned, for example, also tourism. I mean, also in Europe, tourism plays an important role, and a lot of people with really sometimes small hotels and whatever bed and breakfast activities, they are affected by this crisis. So I think it's quite different which sector you are looking at, and of course, and this makes it very complex. You cannot just say, okay, there's one program for everybody, because I think you need different programs for each sector, and really think about it. What does that mean for that sector, and how can I help them?
I think you're completely right. There is a lot of complexity from a number of different angles, and can appear, I'm sure, overwhelming to many companies. How should they start addressing this? With what urgency do they need to consider real change as opposed to just answering challenges come up? How should they structure their own thinking? Now, between the three of you, you advise a lot of clients in a lot of different industries. Are there any best practices, any good advice you can share on how to deal with all of this?
I can take a first stab at it, and obviously my fellow partners will join in. I think, see, whenever we face a crisis like this, right, the first thing is to look at 2 parts: immediate impact and what steps you need to take, right? I call it Team A. So you form a Team A whose immediate job is to look at the crisis at hand, saving lives, making sure all your assets are secured, making sure your clients are safe, making sure that you have immediate liquidity to manage and sail through the crisis. But then you need a Team B, right, which starts looking at what is the long-term change hitting you. Are there consumer behaviors going to change? Is the demand and supply equation going to change? In certain cases, the whole business model might just completely change, right? Are these going to be a threat of a substitute? Is there going to be a threat of a competitor? Is this a game of survival of fittest? You need to then start looking at those 6 months, 1 year scenarios and start doing those scenario planning. So you start shaping your company towards the direction by which you know that you can sail it in long run and continue to be a going concern. Right? But I'm sure Feroz, Marcus, please feel free to add.
No, I think, Bhavin, you're right. Absolutely. I think the worst case scenario is you panic, right? And I think that's something that I recommend everybody to avoid, because in reality, we all feel that we are unable and helpless, and then we fit into a new reality. And the new reality is what is happening now. We are communicating in 2 geographies and thousands of people logging on from around the world listening to us. This didn't happen when we were dealing with each other 6 months ago, right? Could it happen? Of course it could happen, but this didn't happen. Now imagine the power of the network, how much of this knowledge is going around the world on a technology platform, and how much of this sharing we can do today. Well, the common thread out of this is that we are now, people say, oh, is globalization dead? I think globalization, this is globalization we're talking about right now. We're closer. We're ever closer together, that we can share things. Universities are opening up and allowing their curriculum to be free. People are educating themselves online. All this is happening. So I think the companies need to take stock of that and say to themselves that, look, there are certain things that have happened to us. Of course, the immediate issues of cash flow, immediate issues of preservation are all good. But I think they should also focus on retention, making sure that talent is not let go, making sure that people are treated well, because guess what? If we fast track this and we start growing, who's going to end up growing? The guy who fired half his people or the guy who retained his people, right? The fruits of all of that goodwill are going to fall on the guy who retained talent. And so I always recommend, keep an eye out for your people very, very tightly, and make sure that you try and push the envelope as far as you can before you have to take too many drastic steps.
I'll just add to what Firoz just said, because it's an important point. This crisis has really put all of us, whether as small businesses, big businesses, corporates, and even the banking institution, every single one of us, we have one single moral question today to answer and stand up for, right? That do we really do this business just to make money? Or do we really do this for the greater good as well? And that includes taking care of our stakeholders, all of them. Employees, definitely, but so are our suppliers and so are our clients, right? And I think that morality is now outright and the judgment is out there, right? Many people have spoken about it. Now is the time to really do it. And there are companies who will set examples by doing it in the right way. And there are others who may not do it at all.
Thank you. Following up on this, we have one of many interesting questions that start coming on in is about relationships. It's posed from a financial services angle, asking how financial services can do business development and establish new client relationships in this climate. I think this question has relevance really across all industries where you sell, and not only for new business. I think the retention angle, as you've indicated here, is as important. Do you want to comment on what you see as best practices on overcoming the barriers we suddenly see in front of us?
I think, see, the days of going from call to call or going from person to person in a shopping mall and trying to sell credit cards are definitely gone, right? And those, I won't say they're gone forever, but they are at least gone for next 6 months. Let's put it that way, right? Those days will come back. I must say that anything that we talk now, right, is a temporary reality. It's not permanent. However, we are going to be well prepared for anything like this to ever happen again, because we will know how to switch to this mode very quickly, right? But with that in mind, I think from a financial services perspective, I would strongly recommend banks and financial institutions to come with innovative products. People still need banking services. People still need financial services, even when they are sitting home. It's just that it may not be the product that we were used to selling them for last 5 years, right? So right now, if you tell somebody and give them a good saving scheme, which can give them a better return on cash deposit, probably that is far more attractive than trying to sell a loan, right? At the same time, there are people who might even be looking for a loan against a security, but that might not be the traditional security we are used to, right? So there is a small window where banks will have to get innovative and come up with innovative products, and there is a demand for it, because basic financial services is as simple as basic need of food, right? We all are connected through a financial system, so that need is not going to go away even if I'm sitting home for last 60 days. I'm still banking and I do need banking products, perhaps not as the same products that I used to get before. But if there is a new innovative product which can help me in these times, I'll be genuinely open to looking at it. Right? Probably give me a nice health insurance and I'm definitely looking for it. Right? As simple as that.
Thank you. Marcus, you see financial institutions all over the world. How do you see the pace of adoption of new technologies on the product side or on the delivery side?
Yeah, I think, I mean, as said, we are in discussions with many companies. I think that in the past they also said, yeah, we have to do digitization, but it was not really in the main focus. And I mean, if we separate banking into two areas, saying we have retail banking and we have corporate banking. I think on the retail banking side, we have seen some developments like these robo-advisors and things like that. But is it really, has it really a fundamental share? I would say not so far. But what we see with this crisis is that people have no alternatives. They have to choose these digital ways. And this is not only for retail, it's also for the corporates, because also the corporates cannot need their bankers to deal with them. And I think that will really change a bit the way how to deal with clients. And I think another way is that the people find it also somehow convenient to deal on these digital ways and get used to it more and more. Maybe in the past they feared it or they didn't want to get to know it or things like that. But now they had no opportunity, so they have to choose it. And I think some barriers has fallen already also on that stuff. So what I see, at least in some institutions, that they really push this digital button or try to push it. On the other side, and this is exactly the problem that we have, is that at least in Europe, we have these low interest rates with a lot of regulation. So banks are not really earning money. So it's a bit like, you know, if you want to spend something or set up something, you're not able to do so, and that makes it quite complicated. So you have really to prioritize your digital landscape. I think this is of course one of the major topics here.
Interesting, Martin, right? If you would have done this same webcast back in December, how much people we would have got in audience than what we have today?
Yeah.
It's a major shift.
Yeah. No, there are certainly good effects of this, but challenges as well. And here is a blunt question, an interesting one to hear your perspectives on. How will small businesses survive with their cash flows restrained and banks having rising non-performing assets?
Well, from my perspective, one of the areas we've looked at for the government is the concept of very targeted stimulus packages. Mm-hmm. And to size it in a way that there is immediate liquidity, not in the form of cash at this moment, but kind. Meaning, how do you ensure that, let's say, 3 months of rental for a shop is waived? Mm-hmm. Or how do you make sure that the employees of that retail establishment are paid so that they can be retained or repurposed and then be brought back? Because those are the ones that part of the economy has to kickstart immediately, right? You can't wait to hire a person to man your shop. You either have them or you don't have them. Mm-hmm. So the government is certainly looking at it. The toolkit that they have is the banks, meaning as the money gets allocated, it will go to the banks, who will then be able to individually figure out how the SME fits in their portfolio and whether it's, you know, relief of their lending book or interest rate or a principal holiday. That's up to the banks to decide, and hopefully they will do the right thing. But I think there is a lot of tools in the SME arsenal right now, at least in the region, to be able to help them at least for the next, let's say, 3 to 6 months. Now, we're hoping that come 6 months, things are back on track, albeit at a reduced capacity, so that at least then the SME can figure out whether they need to right size or even upsize. As Marcus said, some industries will just grow, right? Last mile delivery is booming. Everybody wants to order online. Nobody wants to go to the shops. They're all scared, right? So how do you then do that, right? You've got to hire tons of people. I mean, look at Amazon, how many, they're hiring 20, 30,000 people, right? Because they just don't have warehouse capacity, warehouse people, last mile delivery people. So I think it'll affect different people in a different way. And I think if it's a 3 to 6 month window, it can be managed.
I'll put it this way. On the SME side, we have two types typically, right? There are SMEs in a particular business where there's a high capital cost. So if you are running a restaurant, you are running a small institute, then you have already committed to a year-long entire rent, and you have spent a big amount of money in just your infrastructure, setting up of the equipment, decoration of the place, high capital, right? And then they are very much reliant on monthly revenue streams so that they can pay their debt. This is one type. The other type is high working capital, and that is typically our traders. And trading is a big business in this country, right? They need huge working capital on a small margin for the trades that they do. So it's a $100 million worth trade to potentially make a few 100,000, but that money is required. And both these SMEs have challenge, right? I would be blunt and honest. SMEs will go through a lot of blunt during this entire period. Some will survive, many will crush. There is no doubt about it. The question is, it's like, see it like a scenario in a hospital where you have one doctor and 10 patients. How is that doctor going to cater to all 10 patients at the same time, right? And that's potentially the same question government has today. Whom do I save and to what extent? Should I try and give everybody equal and bring the survival probability further down? Or should I select a few and just try and save them first, right? And that choices will be made. The moral question lies on the banking side. Because if government says here's a stimulation package, then banks need to take a moral stand and say, am I going to use this just to make my risk return portfolio better by giving this benefit to my client, which was anyways doing good to me, but I'm going to lower my risk and make it look better for my shareholders? Or am I genuinely going to walk out in the economy and try and help the people who really need to be helped at this point in time? But that's going to be a real question that banks will have to answer at some point. And it's not here, it's globally, right? Particularly in our region, our biggest struggle would be that we don't have matured social development institutions. Majority of our social development institutions are very new and very nascent, right? Unlike if you look at Germany, you look at Europe, you look at India, you look at any of the other places, there'll be 60, 70-year-old strong social development financial institution where there exists a mechanism by which government benefit can be distributed, right? They have their own set of problems of bureaucracy, no doubt about it, and slowness, but the mechanism exists and mechanism works. We don't have such mechanisms. We have very limited mechanisms. And hence the burden lies much more on commercial banks to be able to deliver this, the right intended stimulus package announced by the government to make sure that it reaches to the people where it really needs to be.
But in short, Martin, my view is that it's speed over accuracy, right? Yeah. I mean, if you go towards accuracy, you will be doing your algorithm cooking for a long time. By the time COVID will be well and over. So it's about speed, because these people need help and we need to provide it quick.
In simple words, banks have to lend. There is no other thing. If they stop lending now, then there might not be a market to lend anymore in future.
No. Another important question, obviously tied to this topic, is this, and a difficult one to answer. As a lot of people have lost their jobs, when can we expect recovery and an improved atmosphere to do business? And while that might, on one level, be a crystal ball sort of questions, I'm sure there are indicators that you are looking at. When will investor appetite, or what might trigger investor appetite again? There are obviously both corporates and financial investors who have cash today. What are they looking for? What have we started seeing positive movements in certain sectors or in certain parts of the world yet? And what would it take to happen and scale here?
In terms of investments, right? If you look at just purely investments, right? We are seeing investments happening. You look today, in last few days, the number of capital raise that has happened by startups still continues to grow, right? We have a new app which has just got funding yesterday, which is a peer-to-peer lending app and a transfer of money app without usage of any IBANs and everything, right? They just got money. And that is happening as we speak. I think what is happening is that you need to be far more robust with your business case today than what was happening back in December, right? So investors are going to become a bit more cautious, but obviously they are open to opportunity. Anybody who is capital rich, this is a market to invest. Whether you are a believer of real estate, whether you are a believer of gold, whether you are a believer of a new technology, this is the market to invest, because all asset prices are at all-time low, right? So when asset prices are all-time low, it's actually a buyer's market, right? So if you see from that perspective, it is a pure buyer's market. But I think the question that has come is more around, as you said, the crystal ball question is, when is the economy likely to be back in normal, right? My only answer to that is there is no back to normal, there is new normal, right? And we are still in that U-shaped curve. Many people expected this to be V. I believe we are in a U-shaped curve and we are at the bottom. Now, the point is how much stretch the U is going to have before we rise up again, right? Are there indications of we going back to normal? Yes. I mean, strangely enough, but US market last 48 hours has been quite a surprise to many people in the world. Right? So that I do see that things will come back to normal, but yes, we are looking anywhere between 4 to 6 months, hopefully before year end or in 2021. And either of two things will happen. Either we'll have vaccine or we'll have enough beds and ventilators.
Marcus, do you have perspectives on this question, when we can see the trend turning up again? I'm sorry, we can't hear you.
Now, sorry.
Sorry.
We can't hear you, Marcus.
No.
Okay.
Better that way? Better that way?
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry. Don't know. I'm so sorry for that. Yeah, if we look to the European market, what we see here is that we see this recovery, and I think we see a bit going back to normal. I mean, we have still these, whatever, wearing masks, having distance, and all that stuff. But I mean, at the end, some also on the automotive side, production lines have been reopened. We see also restaurants that reopened. We see a bit of normality, and I think that's also a very important sign, because I mean, it's also from the mindset. I think the people are waiting now to get these signs and to see, okay, I did these 7 weeks or maybe 8 weeks in lockdown, and now I see a bit, there's a light at the tunnel, also maybe for jobs, but also for the question how to interact with people and how to have normal life again. And I think what we see here is at least a good sign. Hopefully we'll have the second wave, and the method will avoid this wave.
Sorry, Marcus, I think we lost you again here. Maybe if the technical team can look at this. I'll take up another question that I think builds on this a little bit, from Joby John. How do you think the travel and aviation industry, and we mentioned them before, is very important for this part of the world. How do you think the travel and aviation industries will cope, and how can they overcome the current situation?
Well, I mean, from what I'm seeing is that as Bhavin said, the new norm is going to be a new norm. It'll be less aircraft, less traffic, more measured traffic, perhaps more expensive tickets, right? Just to make sure that can happen. So Look, I don't think there is any going back to 100 million people flying in through Dubai, right? That's going to be a bit of a stretch, at least in the short term. I think what will probably happen is the 380 fleet can be retired pretty quickly. I think that's going to go to the scrap heap quickly. I think there will be new aircrafts coming in which are more efficient, and I think as fundamentally as an organization, they are well prepared to be able to deal with the new normal, and that's going to be the future of aviation in the short term. Perhaps long term, maybe a 10-20% reduction for the next maybe 10-15 years. So it's difficult to predict. I don't think we're going to be going into a zone of getting on a cheap flight and running off to different parts of the world anytime soon.
I'll add to this, right? Travel, hospitality, and even the aviation industry. Rightly, as Firoz said, short term, it's a hold for next 12 to 18 months for sure. Volumes are going to be low. It's very simple. The companies which are capitally rich and they don't have huge debt, right? But they only have a working capital problem. In those cases, they will be smart enough to reduce the working capital, potentially laying off people, shutting down certain properties, and then restarting when they see the surge coming back again. Problem will be with those companies who don't just have to manage the working capital for next 18 months, but where the operating expense, to be honest, can be managed, but the capital expense cannot be managed because they have huge debt and huge loans. Those loans will have to be restructured. Now, those who will be able to successfully restructure that debt over a period of time will survive. Those who won't be able to restructure that debt will potentially crush. Now, again, the asset is not going to go away. Asset is simply going to change hands, right? And we'll see those change in hands happening. And we saw that in 2008-9 as well. Number of companies, number of buildings, number of apartments, the ownership changed, right? And that ownership changes is what we can expect in short term. But in 18 months time, would we all come back to normal and start flying? Of course. One thing that social media has done to all of us is, all of us have dreamt of going and doing holidays every few months. And that's not going to go away from our psychology, right? That's the big dream that we all aspire and we live, and we want to take selfie outside every big monument of the world. So that's not going away. So it's not a permanent change. But yes, for next 12 to 18 months, this industry has to go in hibernation and then come back again slowly as people are ready to get back to, aspiring, fulfilling their dreams. At the same time, when they have saved enough cash to be able to manage such crisis ever in future.
Thank you. Another question, and this might be good for you, Marcus, to address. Hopefully we can hear you now. Will we see an increase in capital control in countries to preserve their wealth?
I think what we see here, at least, is that the regulation itself was even very high in the past, but in the current crisis, they decided not to, let's say, have additional capital controls to go for that. But what I see, and I think that will be maybe the question that the government will try to hold the money together to overcome this crisis. I think it will be the question of how many measures you have to take to overcome, and I think this is hardly to predict what measures will be taken and what comes from the government. So I think it's not quite an easy question to answer that.
Thank you. Anything to add?
I think certain emerging economies will have to do certain capital control measures. They won't have a choice, right? So there are certain countries in Asia, there are certain countries in Africa, Southern America, where they would have no choice than to do a capital control. Otherwise, they might just lose the entire economy, right? So wherever there's a potential risk of economy undergoing a national failure, right? If that risk comes to light, then those economies will have to exercise capital control. They won't have a choice.
Yeah.
Right?
Good, thank
And
you.
we saw that in Lebanon.
Thanks. We have a few minutes left, and while I want to put it out to the audience that if you have any other burning questions, and I know we haven't worded perhaps all of them, but I think some of them are recurring around the themes we touched upon. What I'd like to ask all three of you really now, while we hopefully get a few more questions from the audience, is there are challenges, and we've touched upon many of them. There are also opportunities, and to try to look, maybe not for the silver linings, but at least for opportunities, for best practices, for good stories you've come across. Are there thoughts, ideas you want to share with us?
Well, I'll give you my view. Some of the thriving businesses, like e-commerce, is thriving, right? And the reason it's thriving is because most companies have decided to be crossovers, meaning they want a retail presence, but they also want to have an online delivery system in place. So did fundamentally our behavior of buying change? Not really. We still need some of the basics. It's just the way the channels changed, right? So the one channel was to obviously go to a mall, feel and touch things and buy them. Well, in the last 10 years, that has changed, and COVID is only accelerating that, right? Certain areas, what Marcus talked about around pharmaceuticals, health, telehealth, and telemedicine, and regulations around that have now loosened. More and more drugs are getting on the system faster. More and more consultations are happening online, and people are getting used to it, and that's the new norm. That never happened before. COVID has made it much faster, and it's going to get faster. We all used to go to the office in the morning, do our little job, come back in the evening. Now we're working from our homes. Guess what? A lot of us are liking it. That's not going to change. COVID has accelerated that. So there are many areas you can see that this event has actually accelerated demand for certain things. We are talking on an online streaming platform. Well, guess what? Look at the share prices of some of the streaming platforms out there. Look at the downloads in Microsoft Teams that has gone up by 700-800%, right? So is that going to change? No, because that's the new norm we are in. So certainly the silver lining is that people who are in that space and are prepared are going to obviously eat those fruits. Now, also remember, some of the largest companies today, Google, Facebook, even older companies like Microsoft, Intel, were actually initiated and created in the times of crisis, right? The entrepreneurs had nothing to do. They were highly educated, and they sat around and said, you know what, we're going to go invent something, right? And then comes along Twitter or Facebook or Google, what have you. We are literally in the midst of those inventors today. Things are cooking. And wait till COVID finishes and we come to the other side. You'll see that we'll come to different business models, and we'll be in a new world, and we look back and go, oh my God, there's another Facebook, or there's another Google. So I think I see a lot of silver linings in it, because as humans, we're ingenious, right? That's what we do. And I think there are a lot amongst us who are now cooking the next future.
Thank you. Dr. Marcus, what are you hopeful about?
Now, what I see is at first that the people, I think there's a new solidarity among the people. So the people are really, helping each other. They are looking for each other, taking care of each other. And I think that was very important thing. Second one, what I see is that we really think about if we behaved right in the past, or maybe, and now we are forced to adapt ourselves, and we are able to adapt. I think that's also the great news. There we can easily adapt, as Ferro said, that is human being. And the third thing that I see is that overall, at the end, I mean, of course, there have been many people dying and things like that, but at the end, the whole crisis, it seems to get a bit more under control. And this is also something we can, I think, be proud of, that we as human beings are able to control something like that. that never had come out before. So I think this is also a positive signal.
Thank you. Bhavin?
I personally see it this way that, individually we have distanced ourselves today, but collectively as a humanity, we have come together, right? After a long, long time, we all are together fighting one single war collectively together. And I think all nations have got united. They all are thinking the same thing. Nobody is saying that if vaccine comes from that country, I'm not going to buy, or doctor from that country, I'm not interested in talking to. We have left our differences aside. The political differences have gone aside within the country and at a global level. And I think that is a very good indication, because this kind of, human relationship and collective thinking was very much missing for a long time, right? We were already raising questions about, since World War II, whether IMF and World Economic Forums and various other things are actually effective or not effective. This crisis has brought all of us together jointly, collectively. There are no difference of opinions now, right? There are opinions about who started and who not and blah blah blah, but we got to fight it out together. There is no dispute about it. So I genuinely see that as probably one of the most best silver lining here. I also see that, individually, all of us, it has made us question. We are profoundly questioning everything that we do. Do I really need to buy this? Should I be behaving this way? Right? These questions have come to us. Is my government doing the right thing? Right? Should my government be doing something else? Should I expect bank to behave like this in this kind of scenario? All of these things are potentially questioning us and making us believe that yes, there is a bigger morality, there is a bigger cause for which we all exist, and taking care of each other is perhaps the most important part than anything else right now. And I think, to me, this kind of values that we all will come out through this is probably the best thing we will have for next 20-30 years to rely on. This is the foundation on which hopefully our next generation will learn that giving is also important. Understanding this responsibility is also very important.
Thank you. I want to, with one eye on the clock here, realizing that it is late in an afternoon during Ramadan. We, I think, have addressed all the questions from the audience. We've had a very interesting, nuanced dialogue, I think, touching upon many challenges, many shifting perspectives, different patterns, different behaviors, different industries, different examples, different opportunities. I'm glad we ended on a forward-looking note, because obviously there are many difficulties around us. Hopefully, people who listen in have gotten some ideas on how to start addressing them, but also with a view on the good things that may come out of this. I want to thank you very much, all of you, Feroz, Bhavin, and Dr. Marcus, for your perspectives. We will, all of us, have a look at LinkedIn here, and if there are questions we have missed, we will try to give perspectives on them. And of course, as audience, all of us, feel free to approach us directly if there are things you want to know more about. From my point of view and from ADGM's side, big thank you to you speakers, to all of you who've listened, and be safe. Thank you.
Thank you very much,
Martin.
Thank you, Martin.
And thanks to ADGM. Again, fantastic effort. These dialogues is very important during the time of crisis. So thank you so much for arranging this platform.
Thank you.
Thank you.